Right.
Meanwhile, you're in Washington, covering toy companies.
I covered retail.
Whatever, right?
For 7
like whatever David Ignatius says to cover.
Right.
And there happens to be this company in Vienna.
Well, I got to it because of retail. So
Okay.
I covered the Haft family, which your dad knows well. They owned Crown Books, which was the first discount book. Horrible people. And they were breaking up like King Lear. You know, the father, he had a big head of hair, a big giant, he had a pompadour. It was fantastic. And his son had a little pompadour. And then he had a gay son that had a much better haircut. And a crazy wife and a crazy daughter.
Everybody had hair.
Whatever. They were fighting with each other like, it literally was like King Lear. The father, like the son tried to take the position as CEO before the father wanted. The father fired the son, brought in the gay son. He had been estranged from and installed him, and so I was like, Dynasty, fantastic for me. And so I started writing about them rather significantly. It became a huge story in Washington. Definitely was a career changer for me, that story. And I wrote it literally like it was a drama. Like it was.
And I read every word of it.
It was fantastic. You know, I had the father kissing the son and then firing him.
I didn't know him, but I
and what
the
concept the concept I want to do at the time is this is what business is, people. This is what it was. These were particularly unusual people, but it was. I was inspired by Barbarians of the Gate. And they wrote that book just the same way, that it was drama, that it was interesting, and that business was interesting. And so much of business had been a backwater at the Washington Post, and nobody was writing it as if real people were acting on a stage with money and power.
So this thing, now your stature's grown at the Post.
Yes.
So what? Why do you go to AOL? Why do you care?
Because the Haft family was driving me crazy. I told the son he was fired. I told the father he was getting divorced. I literally was in the middle of this family in a crazy way. And so I went to Russia. To get away from them. And I was using email, and David Ignatius, who is now a very well-known novelist and columnist at the Washington Post, said, can you come back and cover this? And it wasn't the internet, online services for us, because it hadn't been commercialized properly. Gore was responsible for that. To move it from a defense. He didn't
invent the internet, but he cleared the way.
There's no
for a lot
question
of
Gore
it.
played an important
He
role.
just
We're
used
not
the
going to
wrong
do that
word.
tonight. He will be here someday, thanks to your inaugural episode.
So we went. So I went there, and I wouldn't come back until they gave me another beat. So that essentially, I refused to return from Russia at the time, and I was interested in the breakup of communism because that was my major at Georgetown. And so I decided to come back to cover, and I said, email? Oh, I can cover email. I like email, like kind of thing like that. And so I went back and met Steve Case, a very similar thing, very small company. And I walked into his office, and nobody was covering these people. Nobody was interested in it. They thought it was CB radio, which is what a journal person called my beat when I got hired there. And said,
that's a good
one.
Yeah,
no, they did. They said, oh, you'll be covering CB radio. And I was like, no, I'll be covering the end of media. So that was a media reporter who told me that.
Right.
So I just was taken by the internet, that I could download things. I downloaded a whole book and wrecked a university system. It was Calvin and Hobbes. And so it was one of those moments I was like, this is a big deal, because I was in Russia emailing with people back in the United States, and it was.
But you were alone in that moment.
Absolutely.
You felt some aloneness. All of that stuff ends up in this.
Right.
Okay. Right. Now, to do this, to write this book, you're just living with these guys.
Right.
Why? Why did you do that?
Because I thought it was the game changer. This was like being in Hollywood when they were orange groves. You could tell something was going to happen. So I met Jeff Bezos when he had 6 people. I met, Jerry Yang when he had 4 people. I met, you met all these people. Meg Whitman called me and asked me if she should go to eBay. That's how long ago this was. And it wasn't, and I should have said no at the time, as it turns out. So anyway, so I got there, and I was AOL to me was the exemplification of what was going to happen, the commercialization of the internet. And they did the best job, like Walt said. They did the best job at commercializing and talking to consumers. And their motto was, so easy to use, no wonder it's #1.
No.
So easy to use.
The other guys at the time, the pre-internet guys, and even the early internet people, were aligned to techies. They were aligned to average people.
Right.
And yes, you had to have a computer, which meant you had to, it was still too hard to use and all that kind of stuff. But once you got onto their system, it was as easy as something could be to use in those days, and it was aligned.
It was huge.
The other thing they did was, instead of throwing a lot of content at you. They let the users generate the content.
Yeah.
Let me ask you both a question. You know, this group of people in here studying the history of internet media, AOL in 98, 99, 2000 compares to what company today from a stature standpoint?
Google, Amazon, Yahoo, not Yahoo now, but Google, Amazon, Facebook, all mixed
Facebook,
together.
Apple, I mean, you know, it was, we would think of it today as a platform company.
Facebook. Probably Facebook.
Probably Facebook, yeah.
Facebook.
And it was chat rooms. They were called chat rooms in those days. But, you know, that was social networking. It really was social networking. And if you go back and read my review, I'm pretty sure I made the point, and I said this to Case in my initial meeting with him, you don't have news. You know, why don't you have news? Why don't you have this and that? Now, eventually they added all that. But he said, I wanted the content to be created by the users. I said, because you're cheap and you don't have any money. And because I was not in the mode of flattering people I was interviewing.
You were a journalist.
And he said, well, that's part of it. He said, but I also think it's, you know, interesting. And so
this was Facebook.
I agree with Kara. It was Facebook, but in terms, you asked about stature, in terms of, it was more like Facebook than anything else, but it had the stature eventually, not the day that I first went there or that you first went there, but within a few years it had the stature of what we today think of as the Gang of Four platform companies.
Which we're going to get to.
Yeah, so when I wrote this, the reason I want to say, people, this is so important. You need to pay attention to. This company is the example of what's coming.
It's just interesting, right? You're both Washington reporters, and you're saying no to these glamorous beats. You walked away from a very established beat that Jim Baker said, what about?
He said, why the fuck do you want to do this?
Right.
I went to see him out of courtesy, because I'd covered him really for 5 years, and we'd had some fights, but we got along okay in general. And I said, you know, Mr. Secretary, I'm in the office of the Secretary of State, a very lavish, huge office, and I said, I'm just coming by to tell you I'm not going to be covering this beat anymore. And he said, oh, you're going to be covering the White House now, or the Hill, or the Supreme Court? I said, no, I'm going to go write a column about computers. And he said, what the fuck do you want to do that for? He said, that's not important. This stuff is important. I said, well, the stuff at foreign policy is very important. But I explained to him that I thought computers were going to be very important.
And in 91, that makes more sense. But when you're leaving the Post to go to the Journal, what year is that?
This is 95 or 6, yeah.
All of this activity together, Boomtown, your column, everything that's happening leads to the formation of this company.
Right.
Talk about those core things that you were interested in as this began.
The key part for me was I loved online content, and I didn't read the newspaper as a physical object. I just didn't anymore. And I love newspapers, so it's not something, but I really was reading and consuming a lot more online, and I really wanted to do a blog when I came back from a maternity leave. After I wrote a second sequel.
But excuse me for a second, I think you're getting, remember we started this before we started the website.
We started the conference before, but we wanted to start the website first. We did, remember? We wanted to start that.
We talked about it, but I think
Did it originate as a conference idea?
Yes.
Well, we're going to do both, I think.
Yes, but it originated as a conference.
Yes, it came birthed as a conference.
We were going to these tech conferences, and we were seeing people getting away with giving these canned presentations and showing a bunch of PowerPoint. And at some of the sponsors controlling it, keynote, and sponsors were controlling some of what went on the stage. And when there was an interview session like this, we felt they were badly handled, and we could do much better because we're not people of low ego or confidence.
We were bored out of our minds at tech conferences, and tech was so exciting.
So we talked the Journal. The Journal was the Journal had a conference division. They were running all these conferences that had no impact on anything. You know, they may have made a little money, but they had no impact. Right. So we came to them and said, let us do this. And they basically let us do it as a conference.
The idea was to have impact, though. The idea is like, Wall Street Journal had this, it wasn't swaggering, but it had a status, and the conferences were terrible. And you'd be like, how is this happening?
But, you know, it's interesting, right? You guys were around, particularly you, Karen, were around tons and tons of startups.
Right.
Why Wall Street Journal at this point? Why not? You had an insight.
Almost not.
Why do it with the Wall Street Journal?
I think it might have been a lack of imagination to not quit and just do it on our own, but we also thought it would be a good brand platform. I know it's hard to remember, but even as late as when we
10
really
years ago.
got the approval to do this, which was more than, it was about 12 years ago, because we delayed launching it for a couple
Right.
of years because there was a tech bust going on. Having it, you know, we didn't have to invest any money or go scout up investors, but there was a tech bust. The Journal would invest in it, and we could start it from that platform.
We like the dot drawings.
Yeah.
We thought we could make them huge.
We actually made huge dot drawings and hung them around the walls.
Right.
And at the very first D conference, and I don't usually get the best lines, Kara does, but I said, welcome to the Hall of Socialist Labor. Because that's
So-
what it looked like. It looked
Wow.
like the pictures of
Yeah.
Stalin
Back
and
to
Lenin
Brandeis.
that you would see at
The concept was
Moscow.
The concept was doing journalism on live journalism. That was the idea. Is
Live
that these
journalism.
people couldn't escape us.
Whoa, what is live journalism?
That it's real. It's real journalism.
Yeah.
It's like it was really people were answering our questions, and when they didn't, we said, you know, when Carly Fiorina answered a totally different question from the one I'd asked her, I go, you know what, fantastic answer, but not the question I asked. And she would then answer another question. I go, and again, not the question I asked. Please answer the question. And so you would have these people pinned down in a way, and smart people like Jobs love it. Not so smart people probably shouldn't have gotten up there, but that's different. You know what I mean? But I'm just saying, smart people in technology like smart questions.
So we describe this as Wall Street Journal interviews on stage, live in front of you.
Right.
And that was a little untrue because in a real interview you could go off the record and stuff like that, but still,
But
that's what we set out to do.
there's a staff of